Hey, 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 it's your favorite slightly hood therapist, and I am back and super excited per usual because I'm chatting with Mrs. Monica Everett, who is the founder for the All Aboard for Autism initiative, right?
Yes.
Yes, yay, I got it. Thank you so much, Monica, for giving me your time. Um, that this initiative that you're doing is like really, really huge. And of course, I definitely want to hear about that, but I want to talk a little bit about like, of course, tell me what it is, and then tell me why you started the initiative.
Okay. Well, it's the All Aboard for Autism initiative, and basically, it's bringing parents together and embracing the normalcy of autism in our community. It started as it was a launch from another leadership program that I was involved in, and so it was a community project. That's how it really started out. I was a part of the Parent Leadership Institute training for Porter Lee. And
Okay.
so we had to develop a community program or community initiative from that program. And so it launched from there and it took off and it's just been pretty amazing from there. So the kickoff is the first Saturday in September. So,
September the 3rd. Okay.
mhm.
So what does the initiative do? Like, what is it about?
So it's basically about bringing parents together. I am about empowerment for the autism community because I think that if you look at statistics, if you look at really our community, autism is soaring. I think that there's more as it relates to being diagnosed. There are more people, more children being diagnosed day to day. It's like 1 in 44 now. So
Wow.
and of course, it's near and dear to my heart because both of my children were both diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. And so it's one of those things where I know that there's a void, right? There's a gap as it relates to parental support. So the vision that I have for All Aboard is not just about focusing on the children, so to speak. Of course, we know there are resources out there, and we're going to talk about the resources and everything that's in the community. But my heart is for the parents because I know how it is to be deep down in the trenches, to get diagnosis, to have to basically revamp your entire life to deal with it. And as a human being, it's just a lot to deal with. And so I recognize that there's a gap as it relates to supporting and helping the parents and the families as a whole. So that is the point of the initiative. It's to really fill in the gaps and help parents to embrace the diagnosis because it's not something easy to digest when you get a diagnosis such as autism.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned you have two children, and both of your children were diagnosed with having autism at the age of 2. Man, can you tell me like what was that like? How did you find out? How old are your children? Are they boys, girls?
So I have two boys. They just turned 4 and 6, and so they were diagnosed at 2. And usually you won't get a diagnosis before the age of 2. So it was pretty early on when we got it. And yeah, it's so packed full of just, I guess, emotion. Um, we knew that initially there were some challenges with our oldest, who's 6 now. We knew that there were some challenges even from birth. We started to notice different things such as not meeting milestones and um, different things that were just different from, I would say, what we call a typical child, right? Development, just not reaching the typical milestones that you would reach at 18 months. You know, how you go to the pediatrician and you're talking about, you fill out these reports, they have these assessments, and you're starting to notice that your child is basically not meeting, I would say, 80% of those developmental milestones. And so you start to worry a little bit, but my pediatrician was like, well, we'll see 18 months, and when we get to 24 months, then we really need to start being more concerned, So
That's right at the 2-year mark, right?
right, right. And so when we got to 24 months, we really discovered like there's something not quite right. And we started to notice different things. I would say, for example, hand flapping. When he would watch the television, he would flap his hands or he would turn around in circles, things like that, and which is called stimming. In our world, it's called a stimming, which is a repetitive behavior. And other smaller things that were not typical, I would say, sleep patterns. For example, my husband and I, we did not sleep for the first 2 years of this baby's life because he could not regulate other than, he would have to lay on my chest, or his sense of touch, like the sensory,
Mm-hmm.
was very strong. And we didn't know at the time that he needed to actually physically touch like our skin and things like
Get
that.
contact. Wow.
Yeah, have that contact to go to sleep or things like that. But as it relates to your question, was how was it, right? Like how we
When you found out about your oldest, how did they tell you about the diagnoses and how did you and your husband take it?
right. So we did it through the UT Bowling Center for Developmental Disabilities,
Mhm.
called the Center now for Developmental. It's just like the CDD, yeah. So you come into a room and you have a group of individuals. So we had a developmental pediatrician. I believe there was a psychologist there, a speech language pathologist. So it was a group at the bowling center. Now, according to where you get your child evaluated, it may not be this large group, but they're like a center of excellence as it relates to the state of Tennessee. So they had like everybody in the room, and your child is observed for the assessment period. And then you also take some reports. You're given probably 2 or 3 reports to document certain behaviors, and it ranges everything from things that are like occupational therapy, like functional skills, motor skills, how do they react in these particular situations, and then they take them through the testing. And so you sit in the room, so you're able to be present during the testing time. And pretty much, um, I think for the first one, it was maybe it's a half a day. And then after that, they go through and they do pretty much evaluation, and you come back for the second half of the day. And they tell you the results. And so getting the results, I have to be honest with you. I think any parent who has gone through this process, hearing it, right? So you may have your
Conditions.
right, right, right. But when you actually hear it and they come back in with uh, a packet of paperwork, so it's called a psychological evaluation.
Mhm.
So it basically has, and I believe if I remember correctly, you come back the second day, maybe for that, because they have to write up the reports and you get a speech language report and all of that. But for the most part, some of it is a blur because it's almost like you're there and you're present at that moment, but then so much happens after that it's just remembering all of those details. But I remember the second half of the day when we received the paperwork and the diagnosis, and like hearing the words autism spectrum disorder, it was like your heart just sinks. And my husband was there with me at the time, and I remember us just looking at each other like, what does this mean?
Mm.
Will our lives change forever? And absolutely it does. It's an absolute game changer. But you're given this packet of information. I have like some examples of what you're given. Like, for example, you'll be given like a pamphlet, telling you a little bit about what it is. And according to where you get the diagnosis or the evaluation, you may or may not receive all of these resources, but we did because we were at the UT Bowling Center. And then
UT is excellent.
Oh, they are absolutely excellent, like top notch. And both of our children were evaluated there. So, and then they gave us a packet. This is what's kind of intimidating. I have to be honest with you because when we got it, I'm not sure that we actually read through it because we were
You're being hit with a lot.
right, like you're hit with here's the diagnosis, and then there's this silence that is just it's like piercing. So it's so loud, but it's so quiet at the same time because you can tell the practitioners in the room, like they're feeling, it's like they're feeling what you're feeling because it's not their first time, having to tell. And like for me, I remember I broke out in tears. My husband, of course, he was feeling the same way I was feeling, but of course he didn't at the time. But yeah, you get like a list of all the resources and
That looks like a pretty lengthy list.
oh, it's absolutely like very, very lengthy where they give you and for our children, we had more than one. So it was autism as well as mixed expressive receptive communication disorder, as well as global developmental delay. So there were layers to it because not only those other things were under the umbrella of autism, but really speaking of communication, because at the age of 2, they both had experienced regression. So they had words and they basically had lost their words by the time they were being evaluated. So as it relates to commands, asking them to do things, like all of that, that was pretty much, they were in the lower percentile. And as it relates to development as well. So all of those
A
things.
development, are you saying physical development or cognitive development?
Cognitive, yeah, cognitive. And there are some physical aspects to it as it relates to the motor, like fine motor and gross motor skills. Are they able to, twist this jar? Are they able to, just basic things that you would ask? But if they can't comprehend those things in the
They
evaluation,
can't do it.
right, they can't. So it kind of trickles over into each, it's like a domino effect. Well,
Right.
if they can't comprehend it, they can actually physically do it. And are they able to physically do whatever you're asking them to do? So there's so many levels to it. But yeah, you're handed a packet of paperwork, which is excellent. But at the same time, you're trying to process everything that comes along with being handed that and just receiving this diagnosis that your life and your child's life will be different forever.
Okay. So you already suspected, and then you and your husband go there and just get hit with this.
Mhm.
And this is your son is 2. So at this time, had you already had your second child, or were you pregnant with him?
So I hadn't had my second child yet. So when he was, I don't think they're 2 years apart, but possibly I was pregnant with the second child. It's but I know for sure the second child was not sort of a blur. But for the most part, I know my second child was not in the room. So
Right.
but no, I didn't have my second child at that time when we received the first diagnosis, if I remember correctly. But yeah.
Okay. And then, so you take your baby home and you're like, okay, we got all these resources, and now we know like exactly what is happening with our son, like why he's
Mhm.
not doing certain things. And now you got to schedule all these appointments and get all these people into your lives to help your son to thrive and progress. And
Mhm.
then you have another baby and you start to notice what? Same thing?
Here's the thing though, with the second child, there were some different issues because he was in NICU. He had lack of oxygen to his brain at birth, right? So he was in NICU for I would say 2 to 3 weeks, and he had some weakness to his left side. So he had to have some therapy for that. So we were like, okay, and he was going along as usual. We everything was pretty much good with him. He was starting to hit the milestone. So we were like, okay, we're good, and to be completely transparent, when you have the second child, if you decide to, if you have the first child with the diagnosis, it's almost like you have a hope, and you're saying to yourself, okay, well, okay, I have another child, and you're just trying not to think about the possibility. And you're hoping that this child is going to meet these milestones and won't be faced with those same similar challenges of the other child. So we knew that because he had been in NICU and there were some other challenges with him, that we possibly may, have to take him to speech therapy, or he may be delayed, but not necessarily have autism, because you can have delay and not be diagnosed with autism.
Right.
But we started to notice some of the similar things happening with him as well. He didn't walk until he was close to 18 months. The regression. So, talk about your heart dropping when your child starts talking. You're like, okay, he's doing what he's supposed to do. We
Right.
to the doctor and we're like, okay, everything looks really good. We've gotten him rehabilitated as it relates to his side, with walking and all of that. And then we start to notice these small things starting to happen. And we said, okay, well, surely this won't be the second time, this is happening. Maybe this is due to him being in the NICU. And then all of a sudden it just sort of happened. We took him to get him evaluated and we started to notice, but he had challenges more on the social aspect, right?
Mm.
Having like social challenges, anxiety, all of that was different from the first child, who didn't really have, I would say, social challenges, but more of like a lot of cognitive challenges and so forth.
More learning disorder type things.
Right, like more about just, is he comprehending what I'm saying? Like if I'm asking him to do something, it's just a stare. Or one of the major things I think that we noticed was if you were to call their names, if you call his name and he's not responding, and it's like, well, why wouldn't he respond to his name? We've been teaching him his name, since birth, and he knows his name, but
Right.
not being responsive to those things, or also commands, and being sort of spacey at times or not present. And then the back and forth communication of when you speak to your child and you're saying something to your child and you notice that they're not responding in a way. So we started to notice some of those same things. And when we took him in, it was pretty clear that we were going to be on the same pathway.
So, same deal. You, your husband are in this room with all these people and you're waiting for the results.
Mhm. We took it harder. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like I felt like the second time, I'm like, okay, I'm prepared. I'm
Mhm.
down this road. If they say, then I'm okay. But I remember literally sitting in the car, just sitting in the car. We were just literally sitting in the car. And I was thinking, and I had to go back to work that day. And I thought, there's no way I can go back to work. But I thought I was prepared. I think that's one of the things that I know parents need support as it relates to, you think you're prepared, or it's almost like it's comparative to losing someone you love, right? You think you're prepared, even if you know if they have a terminal illness or something like that, and you say, I'm prepared, I know that this is going to happen, but you can never truly prepare for to get this type of information, and especially the second time around. And the first time around, for example, like I was going through postpartum and all of that. So the second time around, I thought I'm more stable, like I'm good. And no, it was the same thing. And then I started thinking about just general aspects of life. If you have two children, how will you, for one, think about financially all of the therapies and all of the support that's needed for one is enough. But then when you get two,
Mhm.
there's constant decision making, there's constant having to evaluate, reevaluate paperwork. I mean, it's consistently every day. There's not a break. And so I can't say that I was prepared for it, and it kind of took me back down that same road of grieving, having a typical life, with my children. So,
So that, and I was going to ask you about that, and I think you clarified with the statement you just made.
mhm.
It is like grief because you feel maybe like there's a loss of all of these hopes and dreams and all the things that as when we have children, like we're not supposed to see their future and what we want for them because they're their own person, right? Like,
Mhm.
yeah, we want to see it, but we want to allow them to be their own person. But when you get a diagnosis like this, then you feel like everything is gone and it's out the window. Nothing that you thought that you wanted for your children may happen. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Because the only comparative thing that you have, and I can say, I will just generalize here and say, in most cases, there may be, others who have experience with autism and then they actually have a child who has a disability and so forth. But I mean, the only comparison that we had as it relates to what life should be like with children was basically what we saw, right? So what we had been exposed to of how we wanted our lives to be, how we had imagined our lives with our children. Um, I mean, you can really look at it if you look at it in a very simplistic way. Just thinking about going outside and playing a game of basketball or football with your child, like it's different for us. It's not, it's breaking down every step of every moment. It's not, oh, let's go outside and throw around some ball, or come on in, you guys go on in there and get you something to eat. It is literally every day is planned out, it's routine, and you're not prepared for that. And I don't know a parent that I've met who can say that they are prepared to really just reinvent their whole depiction of what they have created as it relates to what they want in their lives. And then I know it can be different for parents who have a child or children without disabilities, and then to get one with it. Um, I could only imagine how life is for them as well. But it's not I don't look at it as a sad thing. It's not for us, it's not sad. It's all we know as it relates to raising our children now. We have developed our patterns and our ways of um working through things. So now we know what to expect, and it's what it's all that we know. But I will say that um you can have triggers, if you will, of
For you as the parents, just coping?
yeah, yeah. Like basically you may see someone else's child do something, or when talk about let's just talk about like back to school, for example,
Mhm.
all the back to school pictures. Well, in our world, we may or may not get back to school pictures because the child may not be in the mood that morning, or seeing other children's achievements, right?
Or
And
those social milestones.
absolutely, the social parts of them. Will my child be able to be on a team? Will he play sports? There are just so many questions that you have. And so the best that you can do as a parent is embrace where they are, get them the resources that they need, and just, hope and pray that you can help them to be the best child that they can be, because they will still have their achievements. They will still have great things that they do, But it's not really
A
about
little
your
different.
opinion. Yeah, it's not about what you want for them. At this point now, you have to adjust your thinking to I have to look at what's going to be the best thing for my child and not necessarily my hope and my dream for my child.
So what is the diagnosis that both of your boys received? Because it's like changed so much. It used to be, autism was very specific, and now
Mhm.
the DSM is just like autism spectrum, and it's so broad it can be anywhere. What exactly did they tell you was the diagnosis for your boys?